Hello, my name is Francisco Minaya, and I'm a lecturer at the University of Castilla-La Mancha, and today I'm going to be presenting my and my colleagues' work on doing linguistics with emotions. As humans, we experience emotions on a daily basis and in very different contexts and situations. Emotional experiences conditions how we live, understand, and relate to the world and those around us, to the point that emotions become a central component of our social and personal lives. Over the last 40 years or so, researchers and scientists from different disciplines have looked into the role of emotions from different perspectives and theoretical angles. On the one hand, psychologists, psychiatrists, and neuroscientists have researched how individuals experience emotions, why and how they can regulate them. To do this, they employ machinery and they observe changes inside the body, the brain, the nervous system, and so on. On the other hand, other specialists like linguists and people who study culture and literature have looked into what the words that we use when we describe the emotions that we feel might reveal about the ways in which we understand these emotions and what role they play in specific texts and contexts, and what differences might exist in terms of social linguistic variation, that is, how differently emotions are expressed depending on culture, time, language, gender, or sexual orientation, among others. This presentation is going to explore the linguistic approach to the study of emotion, and it's going to delve into some of the most representative studies on the field of emotion research from the last decades, highlighting theories like the conceptual metaphor theory, which are central to our understanding of the relationship between the expression of emotion and the usage of figurative recourses like metaphor and metonymy. Finally, this presentation is going to provide an example of how both emotion research and the conceptual metaphor theory can be used in the field of linguistics in order to study the cross-cultural variation of specific emotions. What is cognitive linguistics? Cognitive linguistics is a discipline that studies how humans acquire, process, and use language. It is concerned with understanding the cognitive and neural mechanisms that make language possible, but it also examines the social and cultural factors that shape its use. This discipline adopts an interdisciplinary approach, and it combines methods from obviously linguistics, but also psychology, neuroscience, philosophy, or anthropology, among others. One of the main aims of cognitive linguistics is that it tries to provide a comprehensive and empirically grounded account of language and cognition, and it focuses on four main areas. Grammar and meaning. Cognitive linguistics studies how grammar is structured and how it relates to meaning, emphasizing conceptual categories, image schemas, and metaphor in shaping linguistic meaning. Language acquisition and processing. Cognitive linguistics seeks to understand how humans acquire and process language and how language is influenced by cognitive and neural mechanisms. Then we have language variation and change. Cognitive linguistics looks into how language varies across speakers, dialects, and communities and how it changes over time. In this sense, cognitive linguistics and social linguistics overlap. And finally, we have language and culture. Cognitive linguistics investigates how language is shaped by cultural and social factors and how it reflects and reinforces cultural norms and values. Cognitive linguistics and the study of emotions. Cognitive linguistics is therefore a discipline that emphasizes the role of the body, the environment, and social interaction, and how these are going to shape meaning and thought. Within this framework, emotions are seen as embodied phenomena, that is, they take place inside the body and the mind, and they are grounded in our sensory experiences, as well as in our social and cultural contexts. Ultimately, all of these areas influence how, when, and why we experience certain emotions. For example, expressions that are very much culture-specific, such as boys don't cry, are ultimately social prejudices that originate from particular socio-cultural understandings of individual emotions, in this case, sadness. According to cognitive linguistics researchers, emotions are not innate or universal categories. What this means is that instead they are cultural and linguistic constructions. Emotions are viewed as complex and multifaceted experiences that are going to involve a wide range of cognitive, physiological, and social processes. For example, emotions can and do involve perceptions of bodily sensation and the attention that we pay to the stimulus and the evaluation of the situational cues, the situation that we are facing. And then we interpret this according to the social scripts that are appropriate for the expression of this emotion, and then the behavior that is also recommended or prescribed for a particular emotion. What this implies is that in this framework, an emotion will necessarily have to be consciously realized. The person who experiences this emotion is aware of the fact that they are experiencing an emotion. And sometimes this evaluation depends on how the individual is going to assess the situation that is going to provoke this emotion. And within different cultures, There are different scripts, so to say, for when an emotion should be felt, as well as for how this emotion can be expressed through behavior. For example, in Western culture and society, the expression of grief or sadness is encouraged in social settings like a funeral, but it's quite censored everywhere else. Similarly, emotions like anger are more readily associated with men than with women, culturally speaking, obviously, not biologically. Overall, the cognitive linguistic approach to emotions highlight the embodied and culturally situated nature of our emotional experiences and the importance of language and metaphor in shaping our understanding and expression of emotions. In the field of cognitive linguistics, we have the conceptual metaphor theory, which was proposed by George Lakoff and Mark Johnson in 1980, and it has been systematically updated and revised since then. This theory suggests that the way in which we understand abstract concepts or phenomena is shaped by metaphorical mappings between two different conceptual domains. So we begin with metaphor, and in the context of this theory, it is defined as a linguistic expression that maps one conceptual domain onto another. This is a very complex way of speaking, but this simply means that a metaphor establishes a connection between one target domain, which is generally abstract or complex, with a source domain that is going to be concrete or familiar. For example, they resort to the metaphor life is a journey. This metaphor, which is found in different cultures and languages, reveals that we understand life as a process with many ups and downs, decisions to make, or destinations that we have to reach, milestones, like graduating, finding a job, or having kids. This metaphor has a target domain, that is life, which is a very abstract and complex and far more difficult domain to picture up, and a source domain, journey, which is more physical and it's easier to understand. What this metaphor does is that it maps the source domain of journey onto the notion of life. The target domain, in order for speakers to understand it better, through this mapping, the source domain, that is journey, structures the target domain life to the point that the imagery and the vocabulary that is associated with it is that of a journey. We have another example of this in the metaphor an argument is a war, and through it we understand the more abstract idea of an argument through a more physically realized domain, like that of war. Again, this metaphor operates in a series of linguistic expressions like attacking somebody's arguments or defending our position or winning or losing an argument. There is another key element in the conceptual metaphor theory, which is the notion of metonymy. It is defined as a figure of speech in which a word or phrase is used to refer to something that is closely related to it, but it is not the same. Unlike metaphors, metonymies involve substituting one term for another that is based on a conceptual link or semantic proximity, we say, between the two of them. We have some examples. For example, the crown, we normally use this expression to refer to the monarchy. Hollywood or Silicon Valley, which are terms that we use to describe the film and entertainment industry in the US and the technology industry as well. In this case, drawing on the place where they are found, and we call this a place, metonymy. We have an example as well in He Bought a Picasso. In this case, the name of the artist is being used to refer to his works, and we call this a producer metonymy. Or, for instance, I will have a cup of tea. In this metonymy, we are using a container metonymy. We are not having the cup of tea, we are having what's inside of it. What is innovative about this theory is that these recurses are not considered as simple linguistic expressions, but they are deeply rooted in our cognition and embodied experiences. These recurses allow us to understand abstract concepts in terms of more concrete and familiar ones, and this helps us make sense of our experiences. The conceptual metaphor theory is a theoretical framework that has been widely used in the study of emotion expression. The hypothesis that this theory departs from is that our understanding of abstract concepts, like emotions, is largely dependent on figurative mappings between more concrete and physical experiences and the abstract domain of emotions. According to this theory, we use these mappings to conceptualize emotions, to understand our emotional experiences, and to talk about them. This theory has been quite useful in the study of emotions because it provides a framework to understand the role of metaphor in how they shape our emotional experiences. Several studies, for example, have found that people often use spatial metaphors to describe emotions, like I'm feeling up or I'm feeling down, where bad is down and good is up. These metaphors reveal how emotions that are positive are described with upward movement and negative emotions are associated with downwards movement. Another way in which the conceptual metaphor theory has been used in the study of emotions is in how it provides the tools to look into and explain the link between physical sensations and emotions. Research shows how people often use physical sensations that result from the experience of an emotion to metonymically refer to this emotion. We have the effect for cause metonymies, that is, the physical sensations that characterize particular emotions are used to describe the emotions themselves. For example, excitement is generally described by means of the phrase, "my heart is racing," and sadness is generally described through expressions like, "I have a heavy heart." Because the emotions are more abstract phenomena, the bodily sensations that we often experience are more concrete domains to talk about these emotional experiences. For example, we have the work by the Spanish researcher Cristina Soriano, who analyzes most of the expressions for anger in present-day English. Anger is a pressurized fluid in the body container. Have a rise in anger. Anger wells up. Anger can also be conceptualized as fire. Anger burns, the flame of anger. Anger can, for example, be insanity, fit of anger, be beside oneself with anger, also a force of nature, an eruption of anger, a storm of anger, and this reveals how we conceptualize, understand anger based on metaphors that sometimes have to do with our physical perception of the changes in our bodies that result from this emotion, but not necessarily. But these figurative expressions do not only rely on effect for cause metonymies, referring to the sensations that we feel in our body when we experience this emotion. For instance, we have the work by Bucheri et al., who carry out a survey of the metaphors that we find for emotion or emotion concepts in Latin, and these more concrete domains are going to structure the idea of emotion in different ways, like referring to plants, animal, human beings, opponents, object, location, fire, or substances. One of the tools that can be applied to the study of emotions from the perspective of conceptual metaphor theory are corpus linguistics methods. Corpus linguistics studies language through the analysis of a corpus, that is a body, of texts, which is generally considered to be representative of a particular language, or how a given language is used by a language community, by a speech community, or in a given genre or context. Through computational linguistics methods, these corpora, the plural for corpus, can be objectively analyzed to search, retrieve, analyze linguistic data, and they can be treated statistically, and this gives us important information about how speakers understand and talk about certain phenomena. In the case study that we are presenting today, this phenomena is going to be the emotions that are triggered when visitors behold the Giza pyramids in Egypt. What remains of this presentation is a summary, an explanation, and a commentary, basically, of Professor Díaz-Vera's paper on conceptual variation in the linguistic expression of aesthetic emotions, cross-cultural perspectives on an underexplored domain. In his research, Professor Díaz-Vera is interested in carrying out a cross-cultural comparison of the ways in which Japanese and English speakers talk about aesthetic emotions. That is, the emotions that we feel when we contemplate a work of art, an impressive landscape, or a monument, to name a few. And these can range from awe to wonder or the experience of beauty. His main argument here is that these emotions are typically refer to, or more specifically rely on, the psychological and behavioral changes that result from them, and therefore they are highly figurative. For his research, he created a corpus from travelers' reviews in TripAdvisor between 2015 and 2020, and he selected two main languages, English and Japanese, with 50 reviews in each of these languages. His corpus has around 30,000 words, and all of these reviews describe one of the most visited historic sites in the world, the Giza pyramids. Based on the work by Fingerhut and Prince, who are scholars that study the most typical causes for the experience of aesthetic emotions and how they manifest in terms of bodily changes and behavior, Díaz-Vera looks into four main emotion families. That is, emotions of pleasure, like aesthetic pleasure or attraction, emotions of contemplation, which include emotions like interest or intrigue, emotions of amazement, like wonder and awe, and emotions of respect, which contain the emotions of admiration or adoration, and how these emotions or these emotion families are expressed in both of these languages by means of prototypical, somatic profiles, how it feels on the body, bodily responses, how our body reacts to this emotion, appraisals, how we evaluate the phenomena that trigger these emotions, or elicitors, what typically causes these emotions, like a monument, a song, a movie, and so on. Table 2 contains the result of the analysis of the Japanese corpus, which contains 65 occurrences that can be categorized into 15 different motifs that closely relate to how these emotions are described in aesthetic emotion research, as the example mentioned before. Some of these expressions are completely literal, for example, those that relate to aesthetic approval or surprise. Interestingly, the Japanese terms for fear or surprise, astonishment, or wonder are polysemic, which suggests that speakers of these languages do not necessarily conceptualize them as separate emotions, as is the case of other languages. It is also remarkable how speakers of Japanese talk about other emotions that are not necessarily aesthetic, like sadness, which in the view of Díaz-Vera is a result of a negative aesthetic experience of awe. That is, we behold something so big and so impressive that it makes us feel small and insignificant, and consequently it triggers sadness. In line with what has been discussed before in this presentation, Table 2 contains a series of emotion metonymies and metaphors that are used by speakers to describe their aesthetic experience. For example, the metaphor emotion is a force is quite common in this corpus, and in this case it originates from the perception of the pyramids as emanating energy. Similarly, some speakers in this corpus claim that they are recharged with energy. This metaphor is also evident in other expressions, generally grouped under being passively displaced or physical agitation, that also relate to how people feel after their experience, moving involuntarily and losing control of their body. Other speakers highlight different aspects of their emotional experience, like a cognitive challenge that is posed by the pyramids and how big they are, two features that characterize the experience of awe. Another metaphor is the emotion is a substance in a container, which refers to how the sight of this monument is conceptualized as the consumption of food or drink, ultimately filling up a container. Two other metaphors that are more marginally attested in this corpus include the source of aesthetic emotion is a valuable commodity and a desired object is a goal. Table 3 now groups together the English expressions that describe the same sight, but with different expressions that can be seen in this slide. This group also contains some literal denominators for this aesthetic experience, and they can be found in the larger groups of aesthetic approval and awe. Related to the last emotion, there are two groups that relate to the characteristics, as I have mentioned before, that generally trigger this emotion: a cognitive challenge and a perception of vastness, as well as an additional feature, the experience of the supernatural, which is evidence in beyond reality, alluding to how speakers perceive the pyramids as something that is out of this world and supernatural. And there are three shared traits as well between Japanese and English speakers: the conception of monuments as a valuable commodity and as a goal, something to do or see in life, which are nevertheless more common in English than in Japanese. And there is also an acknowledgement in both languages of their uniqueness. In terms of differences, English speakers place more emphasis on the ways in which the sight affects them, like a difficulty to breathe, a deprivation of consciousness, or on the fact that their experience is going to have long-lasting effects. There are no expressions that refer to the conceptualization of this emotion as a force. Instead, English speakers use the metaphor of burst container, which conceptualizes the emotion as a substance that fills up a container and eventually causes it to explode. Additional domains that are more culture specific to the English corpus include religion or light, all of which are intrinsically linked to aesthetic experience. Summing up, this presentation has carried out a brief overview on the connection between language and thought, and how each of them can reveal important information about the other. While language is arbitrary, our lexical choices are not. The words that we use constantly give away information about how we understand the world, our bodies, and how we interact with what is around us. Through the study of these lexical choices, it is possible to reconstruct not only personal taste and individual preferences, but also it can be extended to these individuals' language, community, and to their culture. This presentation has also shown how, since the 80s, the linguistic study of emotion expression and conceptualization has been an important research avenue. The studies that have been published since then reveal how metaphors and metonymies are deeply rooted in language and culture, and how we as humans strive to understand more abstract phenomena in more concrete and physically appreciable terms. This is precisely the case of the vocabulary of emotions, which has been extensively studied over the last 40 years in different languages, different cultures, and even different historical periods. More specifically, in recent years, these publications have stressed the eminently culture-specific role and characteristics of the emotional vocabulary, and this is something that goes in line with the study that has been discussed in the preceding slides. This study, which also illustrates the benefits of inter- and multidisciplinary research, highlights how the same phenomenon, that is the site of the Giza pyramids, is described through very different figurative expressions. And this suggests that the emotions that are treated by the pyramids are conceptualized differently in the cultures of the speakers, while the conclusions that are derived from this study suggest that aesthetic emotions have a more marked cultural variation. These remarks apply to the experience of emotions in general. Being the abstract and intangible phenomena that they are, the conceptual metaphor theory and the studies that take it as a theoretical framework stress how we as humans struggle to make sense of the world and how we seek to encapsulate our vision of it through different metaphors and metonymies. And ultimately, these illustrate how rich our cultural and our inner conceptual landscapes are. And this is it on our part. This is the end of the presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.